The sound that woke Caleb Hart wasn't wind, it wasn't coyotes. It was human, thin, broken, desperate. A scream that had been buried alive. On his first night as a ranch owner in Colorado's high country, the cowboy followed that terrible whisper across frozen ground to his neighbor's estate. What he found chained beneath a storm cellar would destroy everything he thought he knew about fresh starts in quiet valleys. Because some nightmares don't stay buried, and some men don't walk away. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The wind that October night carried teeth. Caleb Hart felt it gnaw through the cabin walls as he lay in his new bed, staring at rafters he'd inspected 3 times before signing the deed. Everything creaked. Everything settled. Everything made sounds that would take weeks to learn, to sort into the harmless vocabulary of an old building finding peace with a new owner. He'd bought the Hart Creek Ranch for a song, which should have been his first warning. 800 acres of high country grassland, decent water rights, a cabin that needed love but had good bones, and a barn that leaned like it was sharing a secret with the mountains. The previous owner's widow had sold fast, packed faster, and left before Caleb could ask why she kept looking over her shoulder at the neighboring property. The Crow Estate. Even the name sat heavy in his mouth when the banker mentioned it. "You'll have one neighbor," the man had said, sliding papers across his desk. "Silas Crow owns the land to your east. Keeps to himself mostly. Big house, old money, nobody sees much of him." "Sounds ideal," Caleb had replied, and meant it. He'd come to Colorado to disappear into work, to let silence and distance do what whiskey and drifting never could. Make him forget the war, the scars, the way his hands still shook when rooms got too quiet. But tonight, the quiet broke. Caleb sat up fast, heart hammering against ribs that remembered shrapnel. The sound came again. Not wind, not an animal. Human. Faint enough that he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it, but there it was again, threading through the darkness like a fishhook seeking flesh. A cry, thin, ragged, wrong. He was on his feet before conscious thought caught up, pulling on boots, grabbing the oil lantern from the table, his coat from the hook. His rifle stayed where it leaned. Some instinct told him this wasn't a threat he could shoot. The cold outside hit like a fist. His breath plumed white as he stood on the porch, lantern raised, listening. The valley stretched out before him in shades of black and silver, mountains cutting their jagged silhouette against a sky too clear, too full of stars that didn't care about human suffering. There, east, toward the Crow property. Caleb moved fast across his own land, boots crunching through frost-stiff grass, the lantern swinging wild shadows. A fence marked the property line. New wire, tight posts, the kind of barrier that said stay out in a language older than words. He climbed it anyway. The Crow Estate rose ahead like something from a fever dream. 3 stories of Victorian ambition, dark windows reflecting nothing, a wraparound porch that sagged in places like a mouth mid-rot. No lights, no smoke from the chimneys. The locals called it abandoned, but abandoned places didn't have fresh fences, didn't have iron gates that looked like they'd been oiled recently, didn't have locks that gleamed new under lantern light. Caleb circled the mansion, following that sound. It came and went like breathing, like whoever made it was rationing strength. Behind the house, where ornamental gardens had gone to seed and winter had killed everything pretty, he found the storm cellar. Heavy wooden doors set at an angle into the earth. The kind every prairie house had for tornadoes and root vegetables, except these had a chain wrapped through the handles, thick links, serious weight, and a padlock that caught his lantern light like a wink. That lock was new, brass still bright. No rust, no weathering. His pulse turned to thunder in his ears. "Hello?" His voice cracked the night. "Someone down there?" Silence. Long enough that doubt crept in. Long enough that he started to feel like a fool, trespassing on a stranger's property because the wind had played tricks. Then, "Help." One word, barely a whisper. But it landed in Caleb's chest like a bullet he couldn't dig out. He dropped to his knees, pressing his face close to the gap between the doors. "I hear you. How many are down there?" "Just..." A cough, wet and terrible. "Just me. Please. He's coming back." "Who's coming back?" "Silas. My stepfather. He'll kill you if he finds..." Her voice broke into something between a sob and a laugh. God, what day is it? October 23rd. A sound came from below that Caleb would hear in nightmares for years, a keen of pure despair. 3 weeks, she whispered. I've been down here 3 weeks. The lantern trembled in his hand. I'm getting you out. Stay quiet. Don't give up on me. Don't have a choice about that anymore, mister. Gave up, quit running out of water. Caleb ran back to his cabin like the devil rode his shoulders. His hands shook so bad, it took 3 tries to grab his toolbox. And he cursed himself for not bringing the rifle after all, because if this Silas showed up now, if he tried to stop... Focus. Get her out first. Deal with consequences after. He made it back to the cellar in record time, tools clanking, breath sawing. Up close, the lock looked even newer. Expensive. The kind that said its owner had money and wanted everyone to know it. Caleb pulled out his bolt cutters. I'm cutting the chain, he called down. Might be loud. Loud is fine. Loud means the world still exists. Her voice was stronger now, or maybe desperation made it seem that way. He positioned the cutters, muscle memory from a dozen fence repairs taking over. The chain was thick, but the cutters were good steel. He squeezed until his shoulders screamed. Snap! The sound echoed across the valley. Caleb froze, listening for shouts, for footsteps, for the click of a gun being cocked. Nothing came but wind and his own ragged breathing. He unwrapped the chain, let it fall heavy beside him, and grabbed the door handles. They resisted, swollen with moisture, frozen in place. He heaved, boots slipping on frost, and they gave with a groan that sounded like the earth itself protesting. Darkness yawned up at him. Cellar darkness, thick and old, the kind that had never seen sun. Stone steps descended into nothing. I'm coming down, he said, and didn't wait for an answer. The stairs were steep, slick. His lantern showed him fieldstone walls weeping moisture, a dirt floor, shelves of rotted preserves from decades past. The smell hit him like a wall, human waste, sickness, despair made manifest. And in the corner, a shape that slowly resolved into a woman. She was curled against the wall, wrapped in what might have been a coat once. Thin. God, so thin he could see the skull beneath her skin. Hair that might have been blonde or brown. Impossible to tell under the grime. She lifted a hand to shield her eyes from his lantern, and he saw her wrist was nothing but bone wrapped in parchment. Don't look at me, she whispered. I know what I must look like. Caleb knelt slowly, setting the lantern down, keeping his movements gentle, like she was a spooked horse. Name's Caleb Hart. I just bought the ranch next door. Lucky you. Welcome to the valley. She laughed, and it turned into a cough that shook her whole frame. I'm Eliza Rowan. Or I was. Not sure what I am now. You're someone who's getting out of this hole. He shrugged off his coat, draped it around her shoulders. She was so small inside it, it swallowed her whole. Can you walk? Haven't tried in a while. Might have forgotten how. But she reached for him, her hand finding his arm with desperate strength. He helped her up, and she swayed like a reed in high wind. She couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds. Easy, he murmured. I got you. One step at a time. They made it to the stairs through sheer will. Eliza's will, mostly. Every step seemed to cost her, but she climbed. Caleb stayed behind her, hands ready to catch if she fell, heart in his throat the whole time. When they emerged into the night air, she stopped so sudden he nearly knocked her over. She stood there, coat hanging off her frame, face tilted to the sky. Tears cut clean tracks through the dirt on her face. Stars, she breathed. I forgot about stars. Plenty more where those came from. Right now we need to move. If he's coming back, he's in Denver until Sunday. Business. Always business. She turned to look at him, and even in the dark, her eyes were bright with something fierce. You don't understand what you just did. What this will cost you. Don't care. You will. Silas Crow owns half this valley. The sheriff, the judge, the banker, still don't care. He guided her toward the fence, toward his land. Right now I care about getting you warm and fed and somewhere safe. They crossed onto Hart Creek land, and Eliza stumbled. Caleb caught her, lifted her without asking permission. She weighed nothing, less than the fence posts he'd been hauling all week. She didn't protest, just pressed her face against his shoulder and shook. His cabin glowed warm ahead, wood smoke curling from the chimney because he'd banked the fire before bed. Home, such as it was. He kicked the door open, carried her inside, set her in the chair nearest the stove. She curled into it like a cat finding sun, hands stretched toward heat she couldn't quite touch yet. Stay there. Caleb moved fast, water on the stove to heat, blankets from his bed, the last of the stew he'd made that afternoon. His hands knew what to do even as his mind spun. What now? What the hell happened now? He brought her water first. Slow sips. Your stomach's forgotten what food is. She obeyed, hands shaking so bad he had to steady the cup. After a few sips, she pushed it away, shaking her head. Hurts, she whispered. I know, but you need it. He wrapped a blanket around her, then another. The stew will be warm soon. You'll take it slow, just broth at first. You a doctor? Saw enough men starve in prison camps to know how to feed them after. The words came out before he could stop them. He didn't talk about the war. Hadn't in 3 years. Eliza looked at him different then. You've seen darkness. Different kind than yours. Darkness is darkness, cowboy. Fair point. They sat in silence, broken only by the stove's crackle and her labored breathing. Caleb ladled broth into a mug, brought it to her, watched her sip like it was medicine. Tell me what happened, he said finally. If you can. What happened is I said no. She stared into the broth. My stepfather wanted me to marry a business associate, August Trent. 60 years old, 3 dead wives, hands that don't understand the word no. Her voice went flat, effectless. I refused. Silas locked me in my room. I tried to run. He caught me, dragged me to that cellar, said I could think about obedience where nobody would hear me scream. Your mother, dead 6 years. That's when Silas showed his true colors. While she was alive, he played gentleman. After, she took another sip. I have no family, no friends he hasn't bought or scared off. I'm 23 years old and I've been his prisoner in one way or another since I was 17. Rage, clean and cold and purposeful, settled into Caleb's bones. Not anymore. You don't know what you're dealing with. Silas doesn't lose, doesn't forgive. He'll destroy you for this. He can try. I'm serious. She met his eyes, and hers were hard now, carved from the same stone as those cellar walls. You don't have money or connections. You're new here. Nobody knows you. Nobody trusts you yet. He'll make you disappear, and the valley will forget you existed. Then we make sure they can't forget. Caleb pulled a chair close, sat so they were eye to eye. Here's what I'm thinking. Come Sunday when he gets back and finds you gone. What's his first move? Come here. To you. You're the only neighbor close enough to have heard. Right. And what can he prove? That you stole his stepdaughter. Did I? Or did a grown woman walk off his property of her own free will? Eliza's laugh was bitter. Doesn't matter. He has legal guardianship. I'm unmarried, under his roof, his responsibility until I turn 25 or marry. That's how he set it up after Mother died, locked me into his control with paperwork and lawyers. Then we changed the paperwork. She stared at him. What? You said he has guardianship until you marry, so marry. Who exactly would... Understanding hit her like a slap. No, you can't. You don't even know me. Know enough. No, you don't deserve to be locked in a hole. No, I'm not sending you back there. It's not your fight. It is now. He said it simple, like commenting on weather. I opened those cellar doors, can't unopen them. This is insane. Probably, but I'm not seeing better options. He leaned forward. Look, it doesn't have to be forever. We marry, that breaks his legal hold on you. We figure out the rest after. Divorce, annulment, whatever. But right now, tonight, we need to stop him from dragging you back there. Eliza pulled the blankets tighter. She was shivering despite the heat from the stove. Why would you do this? What's in it for you? Caleb thought about that. About the war, the camps, the men he'd watched break under cruelty. About the nightmares that still came, the guilt that woke him screaming. About wanting, needing, to be someone who helped instead of hurt. Maybe I'm tired of standing by while bad things happen, he said. Maybe I'm tired of running from fights that matter. Or maybe you're crazy. That too. She almost smiled. Didn't quite make it, but the ghost of it touched her ruined face. If we do this, and I mean if, he'll still come after you. After us. Legal or not, Silas doesn't accept loss. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. You keep saying we. Getting used to it. They looked at each other across the small space of his cabin, this stranger who'd fallen into his life like a meteor, this broken woman with steel in her spine and death still clinging to her clothes. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling windows, making the cabin creak its settling-in song. I need to think, Eliza whispered finally. Fair enough. You rest. There's a bed through there. He pointed to the small room off the main space. I'll take the floor out here. I can't take your bed. You can and will, not up for debate. She was too exhausted to argue. He helped her to her feet, guided her to the bedroom, watched her collapse onto the mattress like someone who'd forgotten what horizontal felt like. Caleb? Her voice was already slurring toward sleep. Yeah? Thank you for listening, for... She stopped, started again. For not being him. The words hit him square in the chest. Get some rest, Eliza. We'll figure out tomorrow when it comes. He closed the door gentle, left her to whatever dreams or nightmares waited. Back in the main room, he fed the stove, laid out blankets on the floor, tried to convince his racing mind that sleep was possible. It wasn't. He lay there staring at ceiling shadows, listening to the wind, thinking about chains and cellars and the sound a woman makes when hope dies. Thinking about a man named Silas Crow who locked people in darkness like it was discipline. Thinking about what he'd do if, when, that man came calling. The rifle leaned against the wall in arm's reach away. Caleb's hand found the stock, traced the familiar grain. He'd done terrible things in the war, things that still woke him choking on screams. Had promised himself never again, never pick up violence as an answer. But maybe violence asked the question sometimes. Maybe some fights chose you. Outside, an owl called. Something small died in its talons. He heard the brief squeal cut short. Nature's cruelty, quick and clean. Not like humans. Humans made cruelty an art form. Dawn came slow and gray. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee. He'd left the pot ready out of habit, and found Eliza standing at the stove, still wrapped in every blanket he owned, trying to pour with hands that shook. Let me. He took the pot gentle, filled 2 cups, handed her one. She sipped, closed her eyes. I'd forgotten coffee could taste like this. Like what? Like something other than punishment. They stood in the growing light, drinking bitter coffee, not talking. What was there to say? The world had shifted overnight, would shift again soon. All they could do was stand steady in the middle of it. Finally, Eliza set down her cup. Her eyes were clearer this morning, the fog of starvation lifting slightly. She looked at him with something like resolve. If we're going to do this, she said, we do it right. No half measures. If I'm going to become your wife, even temporarily, I need to know who you are. Really, not just the man who cut chains. Caleb nodded slowly. Fair. What do you want to know? Everything. Start with why a man who looks like he's been to hell and back decided to buy a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere. So he told her. About the war, not all of it, never all of it, but enough. About coming home to nothing, no family, no place that felt like his. About drifting for 3 years, working ranches from Texas to Montana, never staying, never settling. About seeing the advertisement for Hart Creek Ranch and thinking maybe, finally, here was earth he could plant roots in. Romantic, she said dryly. Desperate, he corrected. There's a difference. And now you're trading one desperate situation for another. Maybe I got a type. That earned him a real smile, small but genuine. Your turn. Ask me something. He thought about it. What did you dream about, down there in the dark? Her smile died. Light, windows, my mother's voice, like stupid things that don't matter. They matter. Do they? Dreams don't feed you, don't open locks. She pulled the blankets tighter. I dreamed about killing him. Is that what you wanted to hear? I spent 3 weeks imagining all the ways I could make Silas hurt. Slow ways, creative ways. Can't say I blame you. You should. That kind of thinking, it makes you like them, like him. No, Caleb said firm. Thinking it and doing it are different countries. You're allowed to be angry. Anger doesn't solve anything. Neither does being polite to monsters. They looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. Two people who'd learned hard lessons about how cruel the world could be. Sunday, Eliza said finally. He'll be back Sunday evening. That gives us 2 days. To do what? To decide if we're really doing this, if we're really... She couldn't quite say it. Getting married. Yeah, that. Caleb poured more coffee, buying time to think. Here's what I know. You stay here, he'll find you. You run, he'll find you. You go to the law, they're in his pocket. You got no money, no resources, nowhere safe to go. That about cover it? Depressingly accurate. So we change the rules. We make it so he legally can't touch you. Marriage does that. And then what? We play house until he gives up? Men like Silas don't give up. Then we make it so expensive to keep fighting that even his pride can't afford it. Eliza frowned. How? Not sure yet, but I'm a quick study, and I make friends with the right kind of people. We'll figure it out. You're insane. You mentioned that already. Bears repeating. They spent the day in careful domesticity. Caleb made simple food, broth, soft bread, weak tea. Eliza's stomach couldn't handle much, but she kept down what he gave her. Color started creeping back into her face, though she still looked like strong wind might snap her. She told him about her life before, daughter of a mining engineer who'd done well, a mother who loved books and music, a childhood of relative comfort that ended when her father died in a collapse, and her mother, grieving and lost, married Silas Crow within a year. Seemed like salvation at the time, Eliza said. A wealthy man, stable, respected. Mother was so relieved. I was 15. What did I know? He hid it well? He was perfect, until the wedding. Then little things started showing through. Control, always framed as concern. Never let mother go to town alone. Needed to approve her correspondence. Slowly isolated her from friends. Her voice went quiet. By the time she died, she was a ghost. Doctor said pneumonia. I think it was despair. Caleb listened, rage building like pressure behind his ribs. And he kept you. Had it all planned. Legal guardianship established before mother was cold. I was 17, no other family, nowhere to go. Became his perfect prisoner, one who sat at his dinner table, one he could show off to business associates as proof he was a family man. Until you got old enough to have opinions. Until I refused to be sold like livestock. Night fell. They sat by the stove, shadows dancing on the walls. Tomorrow was Saturday. Day after, Silas would return. Time was running like water through their fingers. I'm going to do it, Eliza said suddenly. Caleb looked up from the fire he'd been poking. I'm going to marry you, she continued, words coming faster now, like she needed to say them before courage failed. Not because I think you're my savior, or because I'm naive about what this means, but because I'm tired. I'm tired of being helpless, tired of waiting for someone else to decide my fate. This, marrying you, it's the first choice I've made in years that's actually mine. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Caleb set down the poker. Then we ride to town tomorrow, find a preacher or a judge, make it legal before Silas gets back. He'll fight it, say I wasn't of sound mind, that you coerced me. Let him try. We'll have witnesses. We'll make it airtight. You really think we can beat him? Caleb met her eyes. I think we can try. That's all anyone gets. She nodded slowly. All right then, Cowboy. Let's burn it all down. They went to bed in separate rooms. That would be the arrangement, they'd agreed without much discussion. This was strategy, not romance. Survival, not sentiment. But lying in the dark, Caleb found himself wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Marriage. To a woman he'd known less than 2 days. A woman who'd been tortured by her own family, who was planning to use him as a weapon against a man with more power and money than Caleb would see in a lifetime. Insane didn't begin to cover it, but he'd meant what he said. He'd opened those cellar doors, couldn't unopen them, wouldn't even if he could. Outside, the wind rose again, but this time it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a promise. Sunday was coming, and with it, Silas Crow. Let him come. Caleb Hart wasn't running anymore. Saturday morning broke clear and cold, the kind of mountain dawn that made every breath visible and every sound carry for miles. Caleb was already dressed when Eliza emerged from the bedroom, wearing the same filthy dress she'd been locked in. She looked at it with undisguised hatred. "I can't get married in this," she said flatly. "I smell like a grave." "There's a general store in town. We'll stop there first." "With what money? I have nothing." Caleb pulled a worn leather wallet from his coat pocket, counted out bills. "Ranch sale left me with enough to get by. A dress won't break us." She stared at the money like it might bite. "I can't take your—" "It's not taking if we're getting married. What's mine is yours. That's how it works." He paused. "At least that's what I've heard. Never actually done this before." "That makes two of us." They hitched his horse to the small wagon he'd bought with the ranch, another thing held together more by hope than hardware. Eliza climbed up beside him, still wrapped in blankets despite the coat he'd insisted she wear. She was so light the wagon didn't even register her weight. The ride to redemption took an hour through country that looked like something carved by an angry deity. Red rock formations jutted from scrubland, mountains loomed purple in the distance, and everything in between was variations on the theme of beautiful and unforgiving. Eliza watched it all like she'd never seen it before. "How long since you've been off the estate?" Caleb asked. 2 years, maybe 3. Silas stopped letting me come to town after I tried to talk to Sheriff Bowman about—" She stopped, jaw tight. "Doesn't matter. Bowman's his man anyway." "What about friends? People who might help?" "There was Clara Morrison. We were close once, but Silas told her father I was mentally unstable, prone to fantasies. Said I'd accused him of terrible things that weren't true. The Morrisons haven't spoken to me since." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. "He's thorough. I'll give him that. He's a snake who's had years to poison every well." Redemption emerged from the landscape like something the earth had tried to swallow but couldn't quite manage. 24 buildings huddled along a single main street: general store, saloon, bank, church, hotel, and a handful of other establishments that served the scattered ranchers and miners who worked the high country. Not quite a real town, not quite a ghost, just existing in that space between. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of Miller's General Store. A few people on the street turned to look. Strangers always drew eyes in small towns, but most went about their business. "Wait here," he said, but Eliza was already climbing down. "I'm choosing my own dress. Some things I won't give up." They walked into the store together, and the sudden warmth hit like a wall. The proprietor, a thick-necked man with suspicious eyes, looked up from his counter. "Help you folks?" "Need a dress," Caleb said. "Something simple, clean, suitable for a wedding." The man's eyebrows climbed. "Wedding, huh? When's the happy day?" "Today." That got the man's full attention. His eyes shifted to Eliza, widened slightly as he took in her condition, the gauntness, the hollowed eyes, the way she held herself like broken things barely glued together. "Don't believe I know you folks. Caleb Hart. Just bought the old Hart Creek Ranch. This is my fiancée." The lie came smooth as butter. Caleb had learned in the war that the best lies were simple ones, told with confidence. "That's so." The proprietor didn't look convinced. "Didn't know Hart Creek had any inhabitants currently." "It does now." Caleb met his stare without blinking. "The dress?" "Back corner. My wife keeps the dry goods." He called toward a doorway behind the counter. "Martha! Customers!" A woman appeared, wiping flour from her hands, eyes bright with curiosity. She took one look at Eliza, and her expression shifted to something Caleb couldn't quite read. "Lord have mercy," Martha breathed. "Child, when did you last eat?" "Recently enough," Eliza said, chin up. "I need a dress. Something I can move in. Nothing fancy." Martha's eyes narrowed slightly, and Caleb saw her making calculations. "You're Eliza Rowan." It wasn't a question. Eliza's spine went rigid. "I am." "Heard you were sick." That your stepfather had you confined to the estate for your own good. Is that what you heard? The words hung in the air like smoke. Martha looked between them, seeming to weigh something. Finally, she nodded toward the back of the store. Come on then, let's find you something appropriate. The two women disappeared into the dry goods section, leaving Caleb with the proprietor, whose suspicion had crystallized into something harder. Silas Crow know you're courting his stepdaughter? Don't see how that's his business. She's a grown woman. She's his ward, has been since her mother passed, legal and binding. Not after today. The man leaned on his counter. You're new here, so maybe you don't understand how things work. Silas Crow isn't a man you cross. He's got reach, got influence. He owns the bank, sits on the town council, basically decides who prospers and who doesn't in this valley. Sounds lonely. Sounds powerful. You'd be wise to remember that. Caleb smiled without warmth. I'll keep it in mind. How much for the dress? Depends on which one she picks. They waited in tense silence until the women returned. Eliza wore a simple navy dress, high-necked and practical, with none of the frills that might have made her look like a bride. She looked better in it, cleaner, more human, but still fragile enough that Caleb wondered if she'd make it through the day. $3, Martha said. Caleb paid without haggling, added another $1. For your discretion. Martha took the money, folded it carefully. Don't know what you mean by that. I think you do. Outside, Eliza walked straighter, like the new dress had given her back some stolen dignity. They climbed back into the wagon, and she touched his arm briefly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Still got to find someone willing to marry us. The church sat at the far end of town, white-clabbered with a steeple that leaned slightly left like it was trying to hear confessions. They found the preacher in his small office, a rail-thin man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. Reverend Coleman. Caleb removed his hat. We'd like to be married. Today? If possible. The Reverend set down his pen, studied them with the quiet intensity of someone used to reading souls. That's rather sudden. We have our reasons. I'm sure you do, but I don't perform marriages without understanding what I'm blessing. He gestured to 2 chairs. Sit. Talk to me. They sat. Caleb let Eliza speak first. I'm Eliza Rowan. My stepfather is Silas Crow. I've been his prisoner for 6 years, and 3 weeks ago he locked me in a cellar because I refused to marry the man he chose for me. Caleb found me, freed me, and is offering me a way out through marriage. It's a business arrangement, but it's also the only chance I have at freedom. The Reverend's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Those are serious accusations. They're serious truths. Why not go to the sheriff? Sheriff Bowman works for my stepfather, as do most people in this town. Coleman sat back, fingers steepled. And you, Mr. Hart? What's your stake in this? Can't stand by while someone suffers. Not when I can help. Noble. Also possibly suicidal. Silas Crow will destroy you for this. He can try. The Reverend looked between them for a long moment. Finally he stood and walked to his window, gazing out at the street beyond. I've been preacher in this town for 12 years, he said quietly. I've watched Silas Crow build his empire on the backs of desperate people. I've seen him ruin families, buy off officials, twist the law to serve his purposes. I've preached against it, quietly, carefully, and been ignored. He turned back to them. But I've never had someone ask me to actively oppose him. Is that a yes or a no? Eliza asked. It's a question. Are you prepared for what comes next? Because once I marry you, there's no taking it back, not easily, and Silas won't forgive either of you. We know, Caleb said. We're doing it anyway. Coleman nodded slowly. Then I'll need witnesses. 2, by law. And I'll need you both to swear that you're entering this marriage of your own free will. Where do we find witnesses? Eliza asked. Leave that to me. The Reverend disappeared, returning 20 minutes later with 2 people, Martha from the general store and a weathered rancher named Tom Hutchins, who looked like he'd been carved from the same red rock as the landscape. Martha, you've met, Coleman said. Tom here has no love for Silas Crow. Lost his water rights to him in a legal battle 5 years back. They'll witness and keep quiet. For now. For now? Caleb questioned. When this gets out, and it will, I want it known that we followed every letter of the law. that this was legitimate, witnessed, binding. Takes away some of Silas's ammunition. Smart. Caleb was starting to like this preacher. They stood in the small sanctuary, light filtering through plain glass windows, and Reverend Coleman opened his worn Bible. The ceremony was brief, stripped of sentimentality. He asked the required questions. They gave the required answers. Martha and Tom signed as witnesses, their names scratching across official paper that would be filed with the county clerk on Monday. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado," Coleman said finally, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He paused, looked at Caleb. "You may kiss your bride if she's willing." Caleb looked at Eliza. She looked back, something unreadable in her expression. Then she leaned forward, pressed her lips briefly to his, a seal on a contract, nothing more. But her hand found his and squeezed once, hard, and he understood. "Thank you. I'm terrified. Don't let go." He squeezed back. "I won't. We're in this now." Outside, the afternoon sun had started its descent toward the mountains. They had maybe 4 hours before dark, maybe 12 before Silas returned from Denver and discovered his prisoner had vanished. Tom Hutchins pulled Caleb aside as the women talked. "You know what you've done?" the old rancher asked. "Got married. You declared war on the most dangerous man in the valley." Tom studied him. "You got any experience with that? War?" "Some." "Good. You'll need it." He pressed a piece of paper into Caleb's hand. "That's the name of a lawyer in Denver. Nora Pike. She's taken on Crow before. Didn't win, but didn't back down neither. If you're serious about fighting him legally, you'll need someone who won't fold." "Why help us?" Tom's expression went dark. "Because Silas Crow took my water, my livelihood, and damn near my life. Because I've spent 5 years watching him hurt people and being too scared to do anything about it. Because maybe you're the catalyst this valley needs." He gripped Caleb's shoulder. "Or maybe you're just the next corpse. Either way, I'm betting on you." They shook hands, and Caleb tucked the paper away. Another piece on the board. Another potential ally. The ride back to the ranch felt different. Eliza sat straighter, the marriage certificate folded carefully in her dress pocket. She was still skeletal, still haunted, but something had shifted. She was armed now, legally protected. It might not be enough, but it was more than she'd had yesterday. "What happens when he comes, she asked as the ranch buildings came into view. "We tell him the truth, that you're married now, that his guardianship is void, that he has no claim on you. And when he doesn't accept that, we stand our ground. He'll bring the sheriff, claim I'm not mentally competent, that you coerced me. We have witnesses who'll say otherwise, a preacher who'll testify, legal documents. Legal documents he'll fight with more legal documents and judges in his pocket." Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. "Eliza, look at me." She turned, and in the fading light her eyes were enormous. "I'm not saying this will be easy," he continued. "I'm not saying he won't make our lives hell, but I am saying you're not alone anymore. You're not locked in a cellar. You're not his property. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's the deal." "That's the deal," she echoed softly. They spent the evening preparing. Caleb checked his rifle, made sure the ammunition was dry and plentiful. Eliza insisted on helping despite exhaustion that made her hands shake. She inventoried their food supplies, suggested they pack a bag in case they needed to run, though Caleb insisted they wouldn't. "We run, he wins," he said. "We stay, we force him to fight on our terms. And if our terms aren't enough, then we adapt." They ate a quiet supper, more broth for Eliza, though she managed some bread too. Her stomach was slowly remembering its purpose. Color continued returning to her face, though she still looked like a strong wind might shatter her. After dinner, she sat by the stove while Caleb cleaned his rifle with practiced efficiency. The silence between them had become comfortable, two people who'd learned that words weren't always necessary. "Tell me about the war," Eliza said suddenly. Caleb's hands stilled on the oilcloth. "Why?" "Because you've seen me at my worst. Seems fair I see some of yours." He set down the rifle, stared into middle distance. "What do you want to know?" "What it taught you. About fighting." "Taught me that violence is easy, Stopping violence is hard. He picked up a brass cartridge, turned it in his fingers. Taught me that the men who survive aren't always the strongest or the bravest. They're the ones who understand when to hold ground and when to retreat, when to shoot and when to talk. Which is this? Tomorrow? Both, probably. She nodded slowly. I used to think I was brave, before. I'd read novels about heroines who fought back, who defied tyrants. I thought I'd be like that. Her voice went hollow. Then I spent 3 weeks in the dark, and I learned exactly how much courage I actually had, which is to say, none. You climbed out of that cellar. You agreed to marry a stranger to save yourself. You're sitting here planning how to face the man who tortured you. Caleb met her eyes. That's not courage. That's desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. They sat with that truth as night deepened outside. Caleb thought about tomorrow, about facing Silas Crow, about all the ways this could go wrong. He thought about the war, about the times he'd held ground against impossible odds, and the times he'd retreated because survival mattered more than pride. This felt like holding ground, like a line that couldn't be crossed. I'm scared, Eliza whispered. Me too. Really? Terrified. Man with that much power, that much mean, be stupid not to fear him. But you'll face him anyway. Have to. Already made the choice when I cut those chains. She smiled faintly. You keep saying that. Because it's true. Some decisions you can't unmake. Wouldn't want to even if I could. Sunday dawned gray and threatening. Clouds rolled in from the mountains, carrying the promise of snow. Winter was coming early this year, the old-timers in town had said. The land seemed to know it, seemed to be holding its breath. Caleb made coffee, fed the horses, checked the property with the thoroughness of a soldier expecting siege. Everything was secure. Everything was ready. Nothing felt adequate. Eliza emerged dressed in her new navy dress, hair brushed and tied back. She still looked fragile, but determined. A woman preparing for battle in the only way available to her. When will he come? She asked. Soon. He'll ride through the night if he left Denver yesterday evening. Should be here by mid-morning. And the sheriff? Probably with him, maybe others. They drank coffee in silence, waiting. The sky grew darker. Wind picked up, rattling windows, carrying the smell of coming snow. At 10:30, they heard it. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders. Caleb stood crossed to the window. 4 horses approached. 3 riders and 1 empty mount. The lead rider sat tall in the saddle, dressed in a dark suit despite the rough country, hat pulled low. Even from a distance, power radiated off him like heat. Silas Crow had come home. Beside him rode Sheriff Bowman, a heavy man with a badge that caught what little light filtered through the clouds. The third rider was younger, harder, wearing 2 guns and the expression of someone who enjoyed using them. Who's the third man? Caleb asked. Eliza's face had gone white. Marcus Wade, Silas's enforcer. He's killed at least 2 men I know of. Called it self-defense both times. Of course he did. The rider stopped in front of the cabin. Silas dismounted with the ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the saddle despite his expensive clothes. He was perhaps 55, silver threading through dark hair, face lined with the kind of character that came from getting exactly what he wanted. Handsome if you didn't look at his eyes. His eyes were dead things. Stay inside, Caleb told Eliza. No, he needs to see me standing freely. Needs to know I chose this. Eliza, I'm done hiding. They walked out together. Caleb kept his hand near his holster, not threatening, just ready. Old habits. Silas studied them with the detachment of a man examining livestock. His gaze lingered on Eliza, cataloging every change, every sign of defiance. Eliza, he said, voice smooth as poisoned honey, you've worried me terribly, running off like that, disappearing without a word. I didn't run, she replied, voice steady despite the tremor Caleb felt in her arm pressed against his. I was freed. Freed? Silas smiled. From what, my dear? From the cellar you locked me in, the one where you left me to die. Sheriff Bowman shifted uncomfortably. Marcus Wade just watched, hand resting easy on his gun. That's quite an accusation, Silas said. Sheriff, you hear this? My stepdaughter, who has been unwell, is making wild claims. Clearly, she's not in her right mind. I'm perfectly sound, Eliza said, and I'm no longer your concern. I'm married now. Your guardianship is void. That landed. Caleb watched Silas's expression flicker, surprise, rage, calculation, before smoothing back to that poisonous calm. Married? How sudden? His eyes shifted to Caleb. And you are? Caleb Hart. I own the neighboring property. As of yesterday, I'm also Eliza's husband, legal and binding, witnessed and filed. Impossible. Eliza is under my care, my authority. Any marriage would require my consent. Wrong, Caleb said flatly. She's 23 years old. By Colorado law, she's free to marry without anyone's permission. Silas's smile never wavered, but his eyes went colder. Sheriff Bowman, this man has clearly coerced my stepdaughter, taken advantage of her diminished mental state. I want him arrested. Bowman cleared his throat. Now, Mr. Crow, that's a serious charge. You got proof of coercion? Look at her. She's clearly been starved, mistreated. Who knows what he did to convince her to marry him? I found her locked in your cellar, Caleb said, voice carrying across the yard. Starved because you left her there. 3 weeks in the dark because she refused to marry your business partner. Lies, Silas said smoothly. Eliza has been receiving medical care at my estate, under doctor's supervision. Then produce the doctor. Show the medical records. I don't answer to drifters who steal vulnerable women. The air tightened like a drawn wire. Marcus Wade's hand moved closer to his gun. Caleb felt Eliza tense beside him. This is getting us nowhere, Bowman said, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Mr. Crow, if they're legally married, they're not. The marriage is invalid, obtained under duress. We have witnesses, Eliza said. Reverend Coleman performed the ceremony. Martha Miller and Tom Hutchins signed. It's registered with the county clerk as of this morning. Silas's facade cracked slightly. Hutchins, of course, that bitter old fool still nursing his grudges. Their signatures are legal regardless of your opinion of them, Caleb said. We'll see about that. Silas straightened, brushing invisible dust from his coat. I'm filing a petition to have this marriage annulled. Mental incompetence on Eliza's part, coercion and fraud on yours. By the end of the week, you'll be in jail, and she'll be back where she belongs. In your cellar? Caleb asked quietly. In my care. Those aren't the same thing. Silas stepped forward, and Caleb saw the real man beneath the gentleman's veneer. You have no idea what you've started, Mr. Hart. No idea who you're dealing with. I own this valley. The bank, the businesses, the law. You're a nobody with a failing ranch and delusions of heroism. I will crush you. I will take everything you have and make you beg for mercy you won't receive. You're welcome to try. They stood 3 feet apart, and Caleb understood that this was the moment, the point where retreat was still possible, where he could step back, apologize, hand Eliza over, and save himself. He didn't move. Silas's smile returned, but it was all teeth now. So be it. Sheriff, note that I've requested their arrest for fraud and kidnapping. Now hold on, Bowman protested. I can't just note it, Sheriff, or find new employment. Bowman's jaw worked, but he pulled out a notebook, scribbled something. Noted. But I'm not making arrests without actual evidence, Mr. Crow. Then gather evidence. Silas mounted his horse in one fluid motion. You have 48 hours, Mr. Hart. 48 hours to leave this valley, annul this farce of a marriage, and disappear. If you're still here after that, I'll make sure you regret every decision that brought you to my doorstep. He wheeled his horse around, galloped off toward his estate. Marcus Wade lingered a moment longer, his dead eyes promising violence, before following. Bowman hesitated, looked at them with something that might have been sympathy. You folks should leave, he said quietly. I mean it. Silas doesn't bluff. Neither do we, Caleb replied. The sheriff rode off, leaving them alone in the yard as the first snowflakes began to fall. Eliza's knees buckled the moment the riders disappeared over the ridge. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, felt her whole body shaking like she'd been dipped in ice water. I'm all right, she gasped, but she wasn't. Her teeth chattered so hard he could hear them clicking. I'm fine, You're not fine. Let's get you inside. He half carried her to the cabin, settled her in the chair by the stove, wrapped blankets around shoulders that felt like bird bones. She stared at nothing, breath coming in short bursts that weren't quite sobs but weren't far off here either. He's gonna kill you, she whispered. Marcus Wade, that's what he does. Silas points, Wade shoots, and everyone calls it justified. Let him try. You don't understand. Wade's fast, really fast, and mean. He doesn't just kill people, he makes it hurt first. Caleb knelt in front of her, took her freezing hands in his. Listen to me. I've faced men like Wade before. Men who think guns make them invincible. They're dangerous, sure, but they're not unstoppable. You can't fight him. You can't fight all of them. Then we don't fight. Not that way. We fight smart. She looked at him like he'd lost his mind. How? How do you fight smart against a man who owns the law? By making it too expensive for him to keep fighting. Caleb stood, crossed to where he'd left Tom Hutchins' note. You know a lawyer named Nora Pike? I've heard the name. She tried to sue Silas over something years ago. Lost badly. Losing doesn't mean she's not good, just means she was outgunned. He showed her the paper. Tom says she's in Denver, says she doesn't back down from Crow. Denver's 2 days' ride in good weather. We have 48 hours. Then we ride tonight, soon as you're strong enough. Eliza laughed, sharp and bitter. I can barely stand. How am I supposed to sit a horse for 2 days? We'll take the wagon. Go slow. Get you there alive. And leave the ranch undefended? Silas will burn it to the ground. Let him. It's just wood and nails. Caleb met her eyes. You're what matters. Getting you somewhere safe, getting legal help that can actually fight him, that's what matters. She studied his face like she was looking for the lie, the moment where his courage would crack and he'd admit this was too much. When she didn't find it, something in her expression shifted. You really mean that? About the ranch? Bought it to start over. Can always start over somewhere else if I have to. That's not starting over. That's running. It's surviving. There's a difference. Snow fell heavier now, fat flakes that stuck to the windows and muffled sound. The valley was going quiet, the kind of quiet that came before storms, before violence. Eliza pulled the blankets tighter. If we go to Denver, Silas will follow. He'll bring Wade, bring lawyers, bring whatever he needs to drag me back. Probably. And if we stay? He'll come here, probably sooner than 48 hours. Men like that, they don't wait when they're angry. So either way, we're fighting. Either way, we're not giving up. Caleb moved to the window, watched the snow accumulate. Question is whether we fight on his ground or ours. Denver's not our ground either. No, but it's not his the same way this valley is. He turned back to her. Here, he controls everything. The sheriff, the businesses, the people. In Denver, he's just another rich man with a grudge. Levels the field a little. Eliza was quiet for a long moment, thinking. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. If we go, and I'm not saying we should, we'd need supplies, money, and I'd need to actually be able to move without collapsing. Can you ride? If I rig the wagon bed with blankets, keep you warm? I can try. That's all I'm asking. They spent the afternoon preparing. Caleb loaded the wagon with everything they might need, food, water, extra blankets, his rifle and ammunition, the small amount of money he had left. He hitched his strongest horse, the bay mare that had carried him from Montana without complaint. Eliza forced herself to eat, to drink, to move around the cabin even when exhaustion made her stumble. She was gathering strength like someone gathering kindling, piece by piece, knowing she'd need every scrap of it for what came next. Tell me about this lawyer, she said, watching Caleb work. Why would she help us? Don't know that she will. But Tom seems to think she's got reasons to hate Silas. Hating him and fighting him are different things. We'll find out which one she's willing to do. By late afternoon, the wagon was ready. The snow had eased to occasional flurries, but the temperature had dropped hard. Caleb's breath made clouds dense enough to hide in. We should wait until dark, he said. Less chance of being seen leaving. Less chance of seeing where we're going to. I know the road. Rode it coming here. Eliza nodded, then crossed to the small mirror hanging by the door. She looked at herself for a long time, taking in the hollow cheeks, the shadows under her eyes, the way the navy dress hung on her frame like it was draped over a skeleton. "I look like a ghost," she said quietly. "You look like a survivor. Is there a difference?" "Yeah. Ghosts are done fighting." She almost smiled at that. Almost. They waited for nightfall huddled by the stove, not talking much, both lost in their own thoughts. Caleb cleaned his rifle again, more for something to do than necessity. Eliza dozed fitfully, jerking awake every few minutes like something was chasing her through dreams. Full dark came early with the clouds. Caleb helped Eliza into the wagon bed, arranged blankets until she was cocooned against the cold. She looked up at the sky, at the snow that had started again, and he saw fear flicker across her face. "What if we don't make it?" she whispered. "We will." "You can't know that." "No, but I can believe it hard enough for both of us." He climbed onto the wagon seat, took up the reins, and they rolled out of the ranch yard into darkness and weather. The road was already disappearing under snow, but the mare knew her business, followed the packed earth by feel more than sight. They'd gone maybe 2 miles when Caleb heard it. Hoofbeats behind them, coming fast. "Get down," he told Eliza. "Under the blankets. Don't move." "Caleb, do it!" She burrowed into the wagon bed as Caleb slowed the mare, turned to face whoever was coming. His hand found the rifle beside the seat, not raising it yet, just ready. 3 riders emerged from the snow like phantoms. For a moment, Caleb's heart stopped, thinking it was Silas and his men. Then he recognized Tom Hutchins in the lead, with 2 other ranchers Caleb didn't know. "Thought you might be making a run for it," Tom said, pulling his horse alongside the wagon. "Snow's covering your tracks, but not fast enough. You following me or warning me?" "Both," Tom gestured to his companions. "This is James Corrigan and his son Peter. They've got reasons to dislike Crow same as me." James was an older man, weathered as fence posts, with eyes that had seen too much. Peter looked barely 20, but his hands on his reins were steady. "Word's already spreading," James said, "about the marriage, about Silas threatening you. Valley's buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest." "That's going to make things harder," Caleb said, "or easier, depending." Tom leaned forward in his saddle. "There's more folks than you might think who are tired of Silas Crow running this valley like his personal kingdom. They've been waiting for someone to stand up to him. I'm not looking to start a war. War started the minute you cut those cellar chains. Now it's just a question of whether you fight it alone or with allies." Caleb glanced back at the wagon bed, where Eliza had poked her head out despite his instructions. "What kind of allies?" she asked. Tom's expression softened when he saw her. The kind who remember when this valley took care of its own instead of bowing to bullies. The kind who've lost land, lost rights, lost family to Silas's schemes and are looking for a chance to push back. "How many?" Caleb asked. "Hard to say. Maybe a dozen who'd actually fight. More who'd support from the shadows. Not an army, but not nothing either." "And what do you want in return?" "Want you to succeed." Peter Corrigan spoke for the first time, voice young but hard. "Want to see Silas Crow lose something for once. Want to believe this valley can be different." Caleb studied them through the falling snow. They could be genuine, could also be a trap, men sent by Silas to see which way the wind blew. But something in their faces, the weathering, the quiet determination, felt real. "We're riding for Denver," he said finally. "Going to find a lawyer named Nora Pike. See if she'll take our case." "Nora Pike," James whistled low. "That woman's got spine. Also got a personal vendetta against Crow after he got her disbarred in Colorado Springs. Had to move her practice to Denver to keep working." "He got her disbarred?" "Tried to. She fought it. Won technically, but the damage was done. Clients dried up, reputation took a hit. She's been rebuilding ever since." Eliza pushed herself up higher. "So she has even more reason to want him destroyed." "Or more reason to stay far away from anything involving him," Tom countered. "Depends on whether her survival instinct is stronger than her anger." "Only one way to find out." Caleb gathered the reins. "You men should get home. Don't want you associated with us when Silas comes looking." "Too late for that," James said. "He'll know we rode out here. Man's got eyes everywhere." "Then why risk it?" The older rancher's face went hard. Because my daughter tried to borrow money from Crow's bank 3 years back. He said yes, on condition she have dinner with him. She was married. She refused. He called in every debt we had, foreclosed on half our land. His voice dropped to something cold and final. Some debts aren't about money. Peter added quietly, that was my sister. She killed herself 6 months later. The words hung in the frozen air like an execution. Caleb felt Eliza's hand find his shoulder through the wagon seat, felt her squeeze once in shared understanding of how deep Silas's cruelty ran. I'm sorry, Caleb said, because there was nothing else. Don't be sorry. Help us make him pay. I'm not a crusader. I'm just trying to keep my wife safe. Sometimes that's the same thing. Tom reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a small pouch that clinked with coin. Denver's expensive. You'll need more than you've got. I can't take... You can and will. Call it an investment. Tom tossed the pouch, and Caleb caught it reflexively. We're betting on you, Hart. Don't make us regret it. Before Caleb could respond, the sound of more hoofbeats cut through the night. These were different, harder, faster, purposeful. The 5 of them froze, listening. How many? Eliza whispered. 4, maybe 5. Tom's hand went to his rifle. Coming from the direction of Crow's estate. Ride, James said urgently. We'll slow them down. I'm not leaving you to... You've got the woman. We've got nothing to lose. James was already turning his horse. Go. We'll tell them we saw you heading south. Buy you time. Caleb wanted to argue, but Eliza's hand tightened on his shoulder. He's right. We have to go. Meet us in Denver if you can, Tom said, already moving to intercept the approaching riders. The Denver House Hotel. Ask for Nora Pike at the Larimer Street address. Then they were gone. 3 riders disappearing into snow and darkness to face whatever was coming. Caleb snapped the reins hard, and the mare launched forward, the wagon lurching over frozen ruts. Behind them, he heard voices raised in false greeting. Heard Tom's laugh, too loud, too jovial. Heard other voices, angry, demanding. Then a gunshot cracked the night. Don't stop, Eliza said, though her voice shook. Don't you dare stop. He didn't. The wagon flew through darkness, with only starlight filtered through clouds to guide them. The mare ran like she understood the stakes, hooves pounding rhythm that matched Caleb's racing heart. More gunshots behind them, but distant now, muffled by distance and weather. Caleb couldn't tell if they were warning shots or something worse. Couldn't tell if the men who'd helped them were alive or dying in the snow. They knew the risks, Eliza said, reading his face even in the dark. Doesn't make it right. Nothing about this is right, but it's necessary. They drove through the night without stopping, the mare tireless as the stars. Eliza dozed in the wagon bed, exhaustion finally overcoming fear. Caleb stayed alert, eyes scanning the darkness for pursuit, ears straining for hoofbeats that would mean they'd been followed. Dawn came gray and grudging. The snow had stopped, but the world was transformed, white and pristine and utterly trackless behind them. Whatever had happened at their meeting point was erased now, written over by weather. They'd made good time. The road to Denver stretched ahead, winding through foothills that would eventually give way to plains. Caleb let the mare slow to a walk, gave her a breather while he checked on Eliza. She was awake, staring at the lightening sky with an expression he couldn't read. You all right? He asked. I keep thinking about those men, about what they're risking for people they barely know. For justice, for revenge, for the chance to hurt the man who hurt them. Is that justice or just more violence? Sometimes they're the same thing. She sat up, wincing as stiff muscles protested. I used to think the world was simpler, good and evil, right and wrong, clear lines. What do you think now? That the lines are drawn in blood and nobody's hands are clean. They pushed on. By midday, they'd reached the stage stop at Morrison, a cluster of buildings that served travelers heading to or from Denver. Caleb paid for grain for the mare and hot food for them both, real food, solid and warm. Eliza managed half a bowl of stew before her stomach rebelled. She looked frustrated, angry at her own weakness. It takes time, Caleb said gently. Your body's been through hell. We don't have time. Silas is behind us, and we're getting you help that might actually work. They rested 2 hours, no more. Long enough for the mare to recover, for Eliza to sleep a little in a real bed. Then back on the road, always watching behind them, always expecting to see riders cresting the hills. None came. Denver materialized from the plains like a promise or a threat, depending on your perspective. Buildings rose higher than anything Caleb had seen since leaving the east, brick and stone and ambition stacked against the mountains. The streets teemed with people, horses, wagons, chaos and civilization grinding against each other. "I forgot cities were this loud," Eliza murmured. "Stay close. Easy to get lost here." The Denver House Hotel sat on 16th Street, a respectable establishment that didn't ask too many questions if you could pay. Caleb got them a room, one room, because appearances mattered and they were supposed to be married, and helped Eliza upstairs while a stable boy saw to the mare and wagon. The room was small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out on the street. Eliza collapsed onto the mattress like someone who'd been shot. "Rest," Caleb said. "I'll go find this Nora Pike. I should come with you. You should recover. I'll tell your story better if I'm not worried about you falling over." She wanted to argue. He could see it in her eyes, but exhaustion won. She nodded once, closed her eyes, and was asleep before he reached the door. Larimer Street wasn't hard to find. Nora Pike's office was on the second floor of a brick building wedged between a printer and a tobacconist. The sign on the door read Pike & Associates Legal Services in letters that had seen better days. Caleb knocked. "It's open," a woman's voice called. He entered a small reception area that smelled like old paper and determination. Legal texts lined the walls, stacked on every available surface. A desk dominated the center of the room, behind which sat a woman who looked like she'd been carved from the same granite as the mountains. Nora Pike was perhaps 40, with dark hair pulled back severe and eyes that could cut glass. She wore a plain brown dress with ink stains on the cuffs, and regarded Caleb with the expression of someone evaluating a potentially faulty piece of equipment. "Help you?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "My name is Caleb Hart. I need a lawyer willing to fight Silas Crow." Her pen stopped mid-stroke. She set it down carefully, leaned back in her chair. "That's quite an opening. Most people start with good afternoon. Don't have time for pleasantries. Crow's probably already on his way here." "To Denver?" "To wherever we are." She studied him for a long moment. "Sit down, Mr. Hart. Tell me why you think I'd be interested in professional suicide." So he did. He told her everything, finding Eliza in the cellar, the marriage, Silas's threats, the ride to Denver through snow and fear. He told her about Tom Hutchins and the Corrigans, about the gunshots in the night, about a valley held hostage by one man's cruelty. Nora Pike listened without interrupting, her face giving nothing away. When he finished, she stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city. "I know Silas Crow," she said finally, "professionally and unfortunately. He got me disbarred in Colorado Springs on trumped-up ethics charges. Took me 2 years to clear my name and rebuild here." "So you know what he's capable of." "I know he's dangerous, vindictive, and has more money than morals." She turned back to face him. "I also know he's not invincible. He makes mistakes, gets arrogant, underestimates people. Will you help us?" "That depends. What exactly do you want?" "Freedom for my wife. Legal protection from his guardianship. Justice for what he did to her. Justice is expensive and hard to prove. You have evidence?" Her testimony, physical evidence of the cellar, witnesses to the marriage. "His lawyers will claim she's mentally unstable, that the testimony is unreliable, that the cellar was used for something else entirely." Nora returned to her desk, pulled out paper and pen. "But if you're willing to fight, really fight, not just in court, but in the press, in public opinion, everywhere it hurts him, we might have a chance." "I'm willing." "And your wife?" "She's the strongest person I've ever met. She'll fight." "Good." Nora started writing. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we file for a restraining order keeping Silas away from Eliza. We cite unlawful imprisonment, abuse, endangerment. We make it public, loud, impossible to ignore." "He'll fight back." "Of course he will." That's when we hit him with a countersuit. Civil damages for the imprisonment, emotional distress, loss of liberty. We make it so expensive to keep coming after you that even his pride has to calculate the cost. And if that doesn't work?" Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "Then we find every skeleton in his closet and parade them through the streets. Men like Silas Crow don't get that powerful without hurting people. We find those people. We give them a voice." Caleb felt something unwind in his chest. Hope, maybe. Or just relief that they weren't alone anymore. "What's this going to cost?" "More than you have, but I work on contingency for cases I believe in. We win. I take a percentage of the damages. We lose. You owe me nothing." "Why?" "Because Silas Crow tried to destroy me, and I've spent 5 years waiting for someone to give me a legitimate reason to destroy him back." She extended her hand across the desk. "So, do we have a deal, Mr. Hart?" He shook her hand. Her grip was iron. "We have a deal." "Then let's go to war." The snow fell heavier as they watched the riders disappear into the gray distance. Eliza's breath came in short bursts, fog rising between them like ghosts of words she couldn't speak. Caleb felt her trembling and guided her back inside, where the stove's warmth did nothing to thaw the cold that had settled into their bones. 48 hours, she whispered, sinking into the chair. He gave us 48 hours. Means he needs time to build his case, to gather his bought witnesses and corrupt whatever legal process he can reach. Caleb poured her tea with hands steadier than he felt. Also means we have 48 hours to build ours. Against what? You heard him. He owns everything. The bank, the businesses, the law itself. Not everything. He doesn't own Reverend Coleman, doesn't own Tom Hutchins or Martha Miller, doesn't own that lawyer in Denver. Eliza looked up, eyes red-rimmed. What lawyer? Caleb pulled out the paper Tom had given him. Nora Pike. Apparently she's gone up against Silas before. Lost, but didn't back down. And you think someone who already lost to him will help us? I think someone who fought him once might want another chance. He studied the name, the Denver address written in Tom's careful script. We need to send word today. Get her started on our defense before Silas files whatever he's planning. How? The telegraph office is in town, probably already has orders to refuse us service. Caleb thought about that, then grabbed his coat. Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Where are you going? To find someone Silas doesn't own yet. He rode hard toward Tom Hutchins' ranch, following directions the old man had given him. The snow made everything look unfamiliar, turning landmarks into suggestions. But he found it, a modest spread carved into the hillside, buildings weathered but well-maintained, smoke rising from the chimney like a declaration of persistence. Tom emerged from the barn as Caleb dismounted, rifle in hand but pointed down. Figured you'd come, the old rancher said. Saw Silas ride past here like the devil himself was chasing him, except the devil was probably running the other direction. He found out, gave us 48 hours to leave. And you're not leaving. No, sir. Tom smiled grimly. Good. Come inside. Let's talk strategy. The ranch house was small but solid, filled with the accumulated comfort of a man who'd lived alone for years and made peace with it. Tom poured coffee black enough to strip paint and settled into a chair that knew his weight. You need to get word to Nora Pike, he said before Caleb could speak. I'm guessing that's why you're here. Can you send a telegram without it going through town? Better. I can ride to Clayton's Crossing, 20 miles north, different county, different telegraph operator. Silas's reach doesn't extend quite that far yet. Tom pulled out paper and pencil. Tell me what to say. Caleb dictated while Tom wrote in a surprisingly elegant hand. They kept it simple, factual. Marriage performed legally. Threat of annulment based on false claims. Request for immediate legal representation. They included Reverend Coleman's name as reference, Martha Miller's as witness, and a brief outline of Eliza's imprisonment. This'll cost money, Tom said, folding the message. Lawyers like Pike don't work for gratitude. How much? Retainer alone? Probably $200, maybe more for a case against Silas. Caleb's stomach dropped. He had maybe $80 left from the ranch sale. I'll figure it out. I can loan you No, you're risking enough just sending this telegram. Tom stood, tucked the message into his coat. I'm riding out now. Should be back by dark. You get back to your wife. Make sure she's safe. Silas is probably planning his next move, and it won't be pretty. They shook hands, and Caleb felt the weight of that grip, solidarity from a stranger who'd become an ally in the span of days. The ride back felt longer. Snow accumulated on his hat, his shoulders, his horse's mane. The world was turning white and quiet, beautiful in a way that felt like mockery. How could nature be so indifferent to human suffering? He found Eliza at the window, watching for his return. She'd pulled the curtains aside just enough to see out, and when she spotted him, her whole body relaxed. "You came back," she said, as he stamped snow from his boots. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I've learned not to trust promises." But she was smiling slightly, and that was something. He told her about Tom's offer to ride to Clayton's Crossing, about the telegram to Nora Pike. Hope flickered across her face like candlelight in wind. "If she agrees to take our case," Eliza said carefully, "where will we get the money?" "I'll sell something, the cattle, maybe, or take a loan against the ranch. The bank is owned by—" "I know. I'll figure it out." She was quiet for a moment, then moved to the small trunk she'd brought from her bedroom at the estate, the only possession Caleb had let her retrieve in a brief, tense visit under his supervision. From it, she pulled a velvet pouch. "My mother's jewelry," she said, opening it to reveal a modest collection, a string of pearls, a gold locket, several rings. "It's not much, but it might be enough for a retainer." Caleb stared at the jewelry, understanding what it meant to her. The last tangible pieces of her mother, of a life before Silas. "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering." She pressed the pouch into his hands. "My mother would want this, would want me free more than she'd want me to keep trinkets." He closed his fingers around the velvet, feeling its weight. "We'll get it back. When this is over, we'll get it back. If we're not in jail or dead." Ever the optimist. Someone has to balance your stubborn hope. They spent the afternoon preparing for siege. Caleb checked every window latch, every door bar. He inventoried ammunition, sharpened knives, made sure the well water was clean. Eliza organized their food stores with the efficiency of someone who'd managed a large household, her hands remembering skills that imprisonment had tried to steal. As evening approached, she made stew from supplies that wouldn't last much longer. They ate in silence, listening to wind howl around the cabin walls. The storm was picking up, temperature dropping. Good weather for staying inside. Bad weather for anyone trying to cause trouble. Or so Caleb hoped. The knock came at 8 o'clock, hard and official. They both froze, stew spoons halfway to their mouths. Caleb set his down carefully, reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. "Sheriff Bowman?" a voice called through the door. "Need to talk to you, folks." Caleb looked at Eliza. She nodded, straightened her spine. Together they stood as he crossed to the door, rifle held ready, but not aimed. He opened it to find Bowman alone, snow accumulating on his coat, hat pulled low against the wind. No Marcus Wade, no Silas, just a middle-aged lawman who looked deeply uncomfortable. "Can I come in?" Bowman asked. "It's colder than a witch's—" "Well, it's cold." Caleb stepped aside. The sheriff entered, removed his hat, made a show of keeping his hands visible and away from his gun. "Mrs. Hart?" He nodded to Eliza. "Mr. Hart." "I'll be brief. Silas Crow filed papers this afternoon. Petition for annulment based on mental incompetence and coercion. He's got a doctor lined up to testify that Mrs. Hart, has been under medical care for nervous disorders." "That's a lie," Eliza said flatly. "Maybe so. But it's a lie with paperwork and a medical degree behind it." Bowman shifted his weight. "He's also filing criminal charges against you, Mr. Hart. Kidnapping, fraud, unlawful imprisonment. That's rich, considering he's the one who locked her in a cellar. You got proof of that?" "Her word. My testimony about finding her there. Against his word, his doctor's testimony, and probably half a dozen witnesses who'll swear she was safely at the estate the whole time." Bowman rubbed his face. "Look, I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's how it is." "Then why are you here?" Caleb asked. "If it's all decided, why warn us?" The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. "Because I got a daughter about Eliza's age, because I've seen what Silas Crow does to people who cross him, and it don't sit right, even if I can't stop it. Because maybe I'm tired of being the kind of man who looks the other way. But not tired enough to actually help, Eliza said, voice sharp. I help you openly. I lose my job. My family loses our home. Maybe worse. Bowman met her eyes. I know that makes me a coward, but I got people depending on me. So you're here to tell us we're doomed and then wash your hands of it? I'm here to tell you that the hearing is set for Wednesday morning, Judge Carmichael presiding. And Judge Carmichael owes Silas 3 favors I know about, probably more I don't. He put his hat back on. I'm also here to say that if you were planning to run, tonight would be the night to do it. Storm's bad enough that tracks would be covered by morning. Caleb studied him. That an official suggestion? That's me telling you what I'd do if I was in your boots. We're not running. Bowman nodded like he'd expected that answer. Then get yourselves a good lawyer, best one you can afford, because you're going to need every advantage you can scrape together. We're working on it. The sheriff turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Marcus Wade? He's been asking around about you, Mr. Hart, checking if you got any warrants, any past trouble, anything Silas could use. And? Nothing yet. But men like Wade, they don't stop digging just because the first hole comes up empty. He opened the door, let in a blast of cold air. Watch your backs, both of you. Then he was gone, swallowed by snow and darkness. Eliza sank back into her chair, hands shaking. Wednesday, 3 days. 3 days to prepare, to get Nora Pike here, to build our case. Caleb locked the door, checked the windows again out of habit. We can do this. Can we? Against a judge who's bought and paid for? Against witnesses who'll commit perjury for money or fear? We fight anyway. What other choice is there? She laughed, bitter and broken. You could run. Leave me to face this alone. Save yourself. That's not happening. Why not? You barely know me. This isn't your fight. Caleb crossed to her, knelt so they were eye level. It became my fight the moment I cut those chains. I'm not running. I'm not backing down. And I'm not letting him put you back in that cellar. Whatever happens Wednesday, we face it together. That's the deal, remember? Tears slid down her face. I don't know how to let people help me. I've been alone so long. Then learn, starting now. She nodded, wiped her eyes, squared her shoulders. That steel spine he'd seen in the cellar was still there, just buried under layers of fear and exhaustion. They spent the evening planning. Caleb wrote down everything Eliza could remember about her imprisonment, dates, details, what Silas had said. She remembered more than she thought, trauma having carved the memories deep. They documented her mother's death, the guardianship arrangement, the forced marriage proposal. Built a timeline of control and abuse that turned Caleb's stomach. He was careful, Eliza said as she recounted another instance of isolation. Never left marks. Never did anything that could be proven. It was all legal authority and closed doors. Except the cellar. That crossed a line. But who saw? Who'll testify? It's my word against his, and his word comes with money and power. We'll find a way to make yours louder. The snow stopped sometime after midnight. Caleb stood at the window, watching the world transform into something clean and unmarked. Fresh start. New beginning. All the metaphors people used when they wanted to believe change was possible. Behind him, Eliza slept in the bedroom, or tried to. He heard her moving restlessly, heard her cry out once before going quiet again. Nightmares. Of course she had nightmares. He'd have them too, if their positions were reversed. When morning came gray and cold, they found Tom Hutchins on their doorstep, snow-covered and grinning. Telegram sent, he announced, stamping his feet. Operator in Clayton's Crossing didn't even blink. Should reach Pike's office by noon today. Any trouble on the road? Caleb asked. Nothing I couldn't handle. Did see Marcus Wade riding toward town, though. Man sits a saddle like he's got a personal grudge against the horse. They invited Tom in for coffee, and he brought news from the valley. Silas had spent the previous day visiting every business owner, every rancher, every person with even a shred of influence, making sure everyone knew the official story that his poor, sick stepdaughter had been kidnapped by a con man, that the marriage was a fraud, that justice would be swift. He's scared, Tom said, warming his hands on the coffee cup. I've known Silas Crow for 15 years, and I've never seen him work this hard to control a narrative. Usually, he just crushes opposition. This time he's actually trying to convince people. Why? Eliza asked. Because you got married legal and public. Because Reverend Coleman is respected, even if he ain't rich. Because Martha Miller has a big mouth, and she's been telling anyone who'll listen about the condition you were in when you came to the store. Tom smiled. Silas's armor has a crack in it. Small one, but it's there. Small cracks don't win court cases, Caleb pointed out. No, but they're where you start prying. The day crept past like something wounded. They waited for word from Nora Pike, for another visit from the sheriff, for Silas to make his next move. Nothing came. Just silence and snow and the slow torture of anticipation. By evening, Caleb was ready to climb walls. He chopped firewood just to have something to do with his hands, splitting logs with more force than necessary. The physical work helped, channeled anxiety into something productive. He was stacking the last of the wood when he heard horses, multiple riders moving fast. His hand went to his gun as he turned. 4 riders emerged from the tree line, but not Silas's men. These were different, rougher. 2 carried rifles across their saddles. The leader, a heavy-set man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, smiled without warmth. "You Hart?" the man called. "Depends who's asking. Name's Garrett. Got a message from Mr. Crow. I'm sure it's charming. You can leave it in the yard and ride out." Garrett's smile widened. Message ain't the kind you write down, more the kind you deliver personal, like. The men spread out, creating a semicircle. Professional intimidation. Caleb had seen it in the war, had done it himself when necessary. They weren't here to kill. Not yet. Just to scare. The cabin door opened. Eliza stood there, rifle in her hands, pointed at Garrett with surprising steadiness. "You're trespassing," she said clearly. "Leave our property." "Mrs. Hart," Garrett touched his hat mockingly. "Mr. Crow sends his regards. Says to remind you that married or not, you're still family. Says family takes care of family, even when family makes poor decisions. I've made the first good decision of my adult life. Tell Silas I said he can rot in hell." Now that ain't neighborly. Garrett's hand drifted toward his gun. "Mr. Crow also says that accidents happen. Fires mostly, this time of year. Cabins burn fast when they're old and dry." Caleb's blood went cold. "That a threat?" "Just an observation. Valley's seen a lot of fires lately. Tragic, really." Garrett gathered his reins. "You folks have until Wednesday to do the right thing. After that, well, can't say what might happen. Night air's unpredictable." They rode off, taking their time, making sure the threat landed and stuck. Caleb and Eliza stood in the yard, watching them disappear. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "He's going to burn us out," she whispered. "Before the hearing. Make it look like an accident." "Not if we're ready for it." Caleb's mind was already moving, calculating. "Tonight, one of us stays awake at all times. We keep buckets of water ready, sand if we can gather it. We watch the tree line." "For how long? Until Wednesday? Until we collapse from exhaustion?" "Until we win or lose. There's no middle ground anymore." She nodded, jaw set. "Then we'd better not lose." They spent the evening fortifying. Caleb filled every container they owned with water, positioned them around the cabin. He cleared brush away from the walls, removed anything that might catch fire easily. Eliza helped despite her exhaustion, moving with determination that bordered on fury. By midnight, they'd done everything they could. The cabin was as fire-resistant as they could make it without tearing it down and starting over. Caleb took first watch. He sat at the window, rifle across his knees, watching shadows that might be trees or might be men. Everything looked suspicious in the dark. Every sound was a threat. Hours crawled past. The moon rose, illuminating snow-covered landscape that looked peaceful and deadly in equal measure. His eyes burned from strain, but he didn't dare blink too long. At 3 a.m, Eliza emerged from the bedroom, wrapped in blankets. "Can't sleep," she said, settling beside him. "Keep dreaming the cabin's on fire and I'm locked in the cellar again." "We're not going to let that happen." "You can't promise that." "Maybe not, but I can promise I'll die trying to prevent it." She looked at him in the dim light. Why? Why are you willing to die for someone you barely know? Caleb thought about the war, about the men he'd watched die for causes they barely understood, about the ones who died for each other, for the simple human need to protect someone weaker. Maybe because I'm tired of standing on the sidelines, he said finally. Maybe because I've spent 3 years running from everything that mattered, and you're the first thing that's made me want to stand still and fight. That's not a good enough reason to get killed. It's the only reason that ever is. They sat in silence, watching the night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind picked up, rattling shutters. Normal sounds. Or sounds meant to cover something else. Dawn came without incident, gray light creeping across snow that looked undisturbed. No fires. No attackers. Just another day of waiting. Tom Hutchins arrived mid-morning with news that made Caleb's heart leap. A telegram had come to Clayton's Crossing. Nora Pike was taking their case. She'd arrive on tomorrow's train, would meet them Tuesday afternoon to prepare for Wednesday's hearing. Cost was $300, retainer, and estimated fees combined. Caleb handed over Eliza's jewelry without hesitation. Think this'll cover it? Tom examined the pieces, nodded slowly. Should. I'll ride to Denver today. Deliver it to her office personal. That way she knows we're serious. You've done too much already, Eliza said. If Silas finds out, let him. I'm an old man with nothing left to lose except my self-respect, and I lost most of that years ago when I let Silas take my water without fighting harder. Tom gripped her hand. This is me fighting now. Better late than never. After he left, they prepared for Nora Pike's arrival. Caleb wrote out everything they'd discussed, organized it into something resembling a legal argument. Eliza practiced telling her story, learning to deliver it without breaking, without letting emotion overwhelm the facts. Tuesday crawled past like something dying. They took turns watching, sleeping, eating food that tasted like ash. Every sound was analyzed, every shadow suspected. But nothing came. No fires, no riders, no threats, just silence. The waiting was its own kind of torture. Nora Pike arrived on the 3 o'clock train, and Tom Hutchins brought her straight to the ranch. She stepped down from the wagon like someone who'd spent her life climbing out of vehicles in remote places. Practical skirts, sturdy boots, leather satchel scarred from use. Somewhere in her 40s, hair pulled back severe, eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Hart, she said, extending a hand to Eliza. Mr. Hart, let's not waste time on pleasantries. We have less than 24 hours to build a case that'll hold against a man who spent years making the legal system his personal weapon. So tell me everything, and don't leave out anything because you think it makes you look bad. They sat around the small table, and Eliza told her story. Every detail, every moment of imprisonment, every instance of control. Nora took notes in shorthand, interrupting occasionally with questions that cut to the heart of things. The cellar, she said finally. That's our leverage. Everything else is he said, she said, but the cellar is physical evidence. Did anyone besides Mr. Hart see it? No, Eliza said. Caleb got me out before anyone else could. Then we bring the judge there. Tomorrow, before the hearing, we demand he inspect the cellar personally. Silas will never allow it, Caleb said. Silas won't have a choice. I'll file an emergency motion first thing in the morning. Judge Carmichael might be in Silas's pocket, but he's not stupid. He refuses to examine evidence. That's grounds for appeal, creates a record of bias. Hope flickered. Will it work? Depends on what we find there. If it's been cleaned, scrubbed, sanitized, we're sunk. But if there's any evidence left, any sign that someone was imprisoned there, we have a case. They talked strategy until dark. Nora was sharp, relentless, asking questions that made them both flinch. But by the end, they had a plan. Thin, fragile, dependent on a dozen variables outside their control, but a plan nonetheless. Get some rest, Nora said as she prepared to leave for the hotel in town. Tomorrow's going to be the fight of your lives. After she left, Caleb and Eliza sat in the silence she'd left behind. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closer. Outside, darkness gathered like something with weight. What if the cellar's been cleaned? Eliza asked quietly. Then we fight anyway. With what? He'll have his doctor, his witnesses, his judge. We'll have a story and desperation. Sometimes that's enough. She turned to him, eyes bright in the lamplight. You really believe that, don't you? That determination and truth actually matter? Have to. The alternative's too dark to live with. They went to bed in their separate rooms, and Caleb lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the cabin settle and creak. Tomorrow would decide everything. Their freedom, their future, maybe their lives. He thought about Silas Crow, about men who thought power made them untouchable. Thought about Eliza, who'd survived 3 weeks in darkness and come out still fighting. Thought about the choice he'd made to cut those chains, and how everything afterward was just consequence of that single decision. No regrets. Even if tomorrow went badly, even if they lost everything, no regrets. Sleep came eventually, thin and restless. He dreamed of cellars and chains, of fires that couldn't be stopped, of Eliza's voice calling for help from somewhere he couldn't reach. He woke to Eliza shaking him, her face pale in the pre-dawn darkness. "Caleb, someone's here." He was up instantly, gun in hand, moving to the window. In the gray light before sunrise, he saw them. Not Garrett's men, not Marcus Wade. A crowd, 20, maybe 30 people, standing in the yard like they'd grown from the snow itself. Tom Hutchins at the front, Martha Miller beside him, Reverend Coleman in his Sunday clothes. Other faces Caleb didn't know, ranchers and shopkeepers and people who'd decided that silence was no longer acceptable. He opened the door, stepped out into cold that stole breath. "Morning, Hart," Tom called. "Figured you might need some witnesses today. Folks who'll swear to what they saw, what they know. Folks who are tired of letting Silas Crow write all the rules." Caleb's throat tightened. "You'll lose business. Maybe worse." "Probably," Martha said, "but my conscience can't afford the cost of staying quiet anymore." One by one, they introduced themselves, named their grievances against Silas, offered their testimony, built a wall of solidarity that looked fragile but felt like steel. The sun rose over the mountains, painting snow gold and pink. Wednesday had arrived, and they were ready. The courthouse in Redemption occupied a 2-story brick building that had pretensions of grandeur but settled for merely solid. Caleb and Eliza arrived with their small army of supporters, boots crunching through snow that had turned gray from wagon traffic. Nora Pike walked between them, her leather satchel heavy with documents that represented their entire defense. Silas Crow stood on the courthouse steps like he owned them, which he probably did. He dressed for the occasion, black suit pressed sharp enough to cut, silver watch chain gleaming, hat tilted at an angle that suggested casual confidence. Marcus Wade flanked him on one side, the corrupt doctor on the other. Behind them stood a line of men in expensive clothes, each one a piece of Silas's empire made flesh. "Quite the parade you've assembled," Silas called out as they approached. "How touching. Too bad sympathy isn't admissible in court." "Neither is perjury," Nora replied evenly, "though I suspect we'll see plenty of that today." Silas's smile never wavered. "Miss Pike, still tilting at windmills, I see. One would think you'd have learned your lesson last time. One would think you'd have learned that buying judges doesn't make you untouchable. But here we are." They filed into the courtroom, a space dominated by dark wood and the smell of old paper and older corruption. Judge Carmichael already sat at his bench, a thin man with the pinched expression of someone who'd spent decades making decisions that kept him awake at night. He looked up as they entered, and Caleb saw something flicker across his face when he counted the spectators filling the gallery. "This is a civil hearing, not a circus," Carmichael said sharply. "I'll have order." "These people are here to witness justice," Nora said, her voice carrying. "Surely the court has no objection to transparency." Carmichael's jaw tightened, but he gestured for everyone to sit. The room arranged itself into battle lines. Silas and his people on one side, Caleb and Eliza on the other, with 30 Valley residents filling the space between, like a buffer against inevitability. Before the judge could speak, Nora stood. "Your Honor, I'm filing an emergency motion to examine physical evidence before this hearing proceeds." She slid papers across the bailiff's desk. Carmichael took them, read with increasing displeasure. "You want to visit the Crow estate? Now?" "The cellar specifically. Mrs. Hart claims she was imprisoned there for 3 weeks. Such evidence is central to determining her mental state and the legitimacy of her marriage." Silas's lawyer, a sleek man named Harrison, rose smoothly. "Objection. This is a transparent attempt to delay proceedings and trespass on my client's private property." Trespass? Nora's eyebrows climbed. To examine evidence of a crime? Or is Mr. Crow afraid of what we might find? There's nothing to find because nothing happened, Silas interjected. My stepdaughter was never imprisoned. She was under medical care in her bedroom, as Dr. Pemberton will testify. Then you should have no objection to proving it, Caleb said, speaking for the first time. The courtroom went quiet. All eyes turned to Silas, whose expression had frozen into something carved from ice. Judge Carmichael tapped the papers. The motion has merit. If there's evidence that bears on mental competency, the court should examine it. Your Honor, Harrison began, but Carmichael cut him off. We'll adjourn to the Crow estate. Now. Bailiff, arrange transportation. Silas's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the fury beneath. Then it was back, smooth as oil. Of course, Your Honor, I have nothing to hide. The procession to the estate was surreal, carriages and wagons forming a line through snow-covered valley, like some grotesque funeral march. Eliza sat rigid beside Caleb, hands clenched in her lap so tight her knuckles had gone white. What if he cleaned it? She whispered. What if there's nothing left? Then we tell the truth anyway. Truth without evidence is just a story. Sometimes stories are all we have. The Crow estate loomed ahead, that Victorian monstrosity looking even more ominous in daylight. They dismounted in the circular drive, boots sinking into snow that had been shoveled into precise paths. Everything about the place screamed control, order, power maintained through meticulous attention to detail. Silas led them around the house with the air of a king showing peasants his domain. When they reached the storm cellar, Caleb's heart sank. The doors were open, propped back against the ground. Someone had already been here. As you can see, Silas said smoothly, simply a root cellar. Nothing sinister. Nora descended the steps first, Caleb close behind. The others followed. Judge Carmichael, Sheriff Bowman, Dr. Pemberton, Harrison the lawyer. Eliza came last, her breathing shallow and quick. The cellar had been scrubbed. The dirt floor was swept clean, the walls brushed down, even the cobwebs removed. The smell of lye hung in the air, sharp and accusing. Every surface gleamed with the evidence of recent, desperate cleaning. See? Silas gestured expansively. A normal storage space, hardly a prison. But Caleb was looking at Eliza, watching her face as she scanned the cellar. Her eyes fixed on something in the far corner, and her whole body went still. There, she said, voice barely audible. That's where I slept, where I... She moved to the spot, knelt down. There was a blanket here. Gray wool, moth-eaten, and I scratched marks into the wall. Days. 21 of them. Everyone crowded around. The wall looked clean, but when Caleb leaned close, he saw them. Faint scratches in the stone, barely visible. But there, 21 marks, grouped in sets of 5. Could have been made any time, Harrison said quickly. By anyone. Could have, Nora agreed. But they weren't. Judge, look at this. She pointed to the scratches, then to Eliza's fingernails. Several were broken, torn down to the quick. Fresh damage, weeks old at most. Coincidence, Silas said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. And this? Nora knelt beside what looked like a dark stain on the stone. She scraped at it with a knife, collected residue. Looks like blood. Old, but not that old. We could have it tested. From when I hit my head, Eliza said, touching a spot on her temple where a fading bruise still showed. The second day, I tried to climb out, fell. Dr. Pemberton cleared his throat. That bruise is consistent with a fall, yes, but it could have happened anywhere. True, Nora said. But combined with the scratch marks, her broken nails, her condition when she was found, it paints a picture, doesn't it? Judge Carmichael was studying the walls, the floor, the scratch marks. His expression had shifted from irritation to something harder to read. Mr. Crow, he said finally, when did you last use this cellar? I don't personally use it. The staff might store vegetables. The staff, Carmichael interrupted, who apparently scrubbed it spotless very recently. I can still smell the lye. Why clean a root cellar so thoroughly? Silas's smile was wearing thin. Spring cleaning. In October? I run a well-maintained household, Your Honor. They climbed back into daylight, and Caleb watched the judge's face carefully. Carmichael was thinking, weighing, calculating. A man used to bending for Silas Crow, but also used to covering his own exposure. The scratch marks had been unexpected, the blood stain even more so. "Back to the courthouse," Carmichael ordered. "We'll hear testimony." The return journey felt different. Silas had lost his smugness, though he tried to maintain it. His people looked uncertain, and the valley residents who'd come to witness were whispering among themselves, the sound building like distant thunder. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The gallery was fuller now. Word had spread, and more people had come. The windows were crowded with faces of those who couldn't fit inside. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was theater, spectacle, the moment when power would either hold or break. "We'll hear from Dr. Pemberton first," Carmichael said, settling behind his bench. The doctor took the stand, a portly man with soft hands and softer morals. He testified that Eliza had been under his care for nervous disorders, that she'd been confined to her bedroom for her own safety, that her claims of imprisonment were delusions brought on by her illness. "And what were the symptoms of this illness?" Nora asked during cross-examination. "Agitation, paranoia, making false accusations against her stepfather." "False accusations like what?" "That he was controlling, that he mistreated her, that he wanted to force her into marriage." "And you diagnosed this as mental illness rather than accurate reporting of abuse?" "I diagnosed it based on medical observation and Mr. Crow's testimony about her behavior." "Did you examine her in the 3 weeks before Mr. Hart found her?" Pemberton hesitated. "I was out of town." "So you have no direct knowledge of her condition during that period?" "Mr. Crow kept me informed by telegram." "Telegrams written by the man accused of imprisoning her. Hardly objective medical evidence." Harrison objected, but the damage was done. The gallery murmured. Carmichael called for order, but looked thoughtful. Next came Silas's witnesses, servants who swore they'd seen Eliza in her bedroom, healthy and well cared for. But under Nora's questioning, their stories fell apart. Dates didn't match. Details conflicted. One maid admitted she'd only seen Eliza through a closed door. Another conceded that he'd been told what to say and offered money for his testimony. By the time Harrison rested his case, the facade was cracking. "Mrs. Hart," Nora said, "please take the stand." Eliza stood, and Caleb saw her hands trembling, but she walked to the witness chair with her spine straight, sat down, and met Silas's gaze without flinching. Nora led her through the story, her mother's death, the guardianship, years of increasing control, the forced marriage proposal, the imprisonment, 21 days in the dark. "Why didn't you cry out?" Harrison asked during cross-examination. "If you were truly imprisoned, why not scream for help?" "I did, the first few days, until my voice gave out and I realized no one was coming." "Convenient. No witnesses to your alleged suffering." "There's a witness," Eliza said quietly. "My body. The doctor who examined me after Mr. Hart found me can testify to my condition. Malnutrition, dehydration, infected wounds from lying on stone." Harrison paused. "What doctor? No such examination is in evidence." "Because we haven't called him yet," Nora said, standing. "Dr. Samuel Morrison from Clayton's Crossing. He examined Mrs. Hart 2 days after her rescue. I have his written statement here, and he's waiting outside to testify." The courtroom erupted. Carmichael banged his gavel, demanding order. Silas leaned forward, whispering urgently to Harrison. Marcus Wade's hand had moved to his gun. "This is highly irregular," Harrison protested. "Ambushing us with witnesses." "Ambushing you with evidence?" Nora countered. "I filed notice of Dr. Morrison's testimony this morning. Not my fault if you didn't read it." Carmichael called Dr. Morrison to the stand. The doctor was young, earnest, and clearly nervous about testifying against someone as powerful as Silas Crow. But his medical observations were damning. Severe malnutrition consistent with prolonged starvation, dehydration, contusions and abrasions consistent with imprisonment in a stone cellar, psychological trauma consistent with torture. "Could these injuries have been self-inflicted?" Harrison asked desperately. "No," Morrison said firmly. "The pattern is wrong. The severity too extreme. This was done to her, not by her." When the testimony ended, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. Even Carmichael looked shaken, the careful neutrality he'd maintained crumbling. "Your Honor," Nora said into that silence, "the evidence is clear. Eliza Hart was imprisoned and tortured by her stepfather. Her marriage to Caleb Hart was her escape from that torture. To annul it now would be to send her back to her abuser. I'm asking the court to deny Mr. Crow's petition and to launch a criminal investigation into his actions." "Lies," Silas said, standing abruptly. "All of it. My stepdaughter is mentally ill, and these people have convinced her to turn against me. This man," he pointed at Caleb, "is a con man who saw an opportunity and took it. The marriage is invalid, obtained through fraud and manipulation." "The only fraud here is yours," Caleb said, rising as well. "The only manipulation is what you've done to her for 6 years. You know nothing about— I know you locked her in a cellar like an animal. I know you tried to sell her to a 60-year-old man. I know you've spent this entire hearing lying through your teeth while people who depend on you for their livelihoods swore false oaths on your behalf." The courtroom held its breath. Silas and Caleb faced each other across the space between the tables, and Caleb saw the monster behind the gentleman's mask, saw the rage, the need for control, the absolute certainty that he was untouchable. "Your Honor," Nora said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I have one more witness, August Trent." The name landed like a bomb. Silas went pale. Harrison stood so fast his chair toppled. "Objection! Mr. Trent has no relevance to it." "Mr. Trent has every relevance. He's the man Silas Crow tried to force his stepdaughter to marry. The man who stood to gain from that arrangement. I think the court would be very interested in his testimony." The bailiff opened the courtroom door, and an elderly man walked in. 65 if he was a day, dressed in expensive clothes that couldn't hide the predatory gleam in his eyes. But as he took the stand, that gleam faltered. He looked at the gallery, at the faces of people he'd done business with, and something in him seemed to crack. "Mr. Trent," Nora began, "did Silas Crow offer you Eliza Rowan in marriage?" "Yes," Trent said quietly. "In exchange for what? Mining rights, land, business considerations. Did Miss Rowan consent to this arrangement? She was told she didn't have a choice." "By whom?" "By Silas." Trent looked at Silas, and there was something like shame in his expression. "He said she'd come around eventually, that young women always did when they understood their position." "And what was her position? Property? His to dispose of as he saw fit?" The courtroom exploded. People stood, shouting. Carmichael pounded his gavel until it cracked. Sheriff Bowman moved to restore order, but even he looked shaken. "Why are you testifying against him?" Nora asked when the noise died down. "What changed?" Trent was silent for a long moment. "I saw her. At the general store. Saw what he'd done to her, and I—" His voice broke. "I have daughters. Granddaughters. The thought of them being treated that way, of me being the kind of man who'd participate in it—" He shook his head. "I'm already going to hell for the things I've done in business, but this? I won't carry this sin." Silas was on his feet, face purple with rage. "You lying, treacherous— Mr. Crow, sit down!" Carmichael's voice cracked like a whip. "Mr. Trent, you're testifying that Silas Crow treated his stepdaughter as property to be sold?" "Yes, Your Honor, and I was willing to buy her. That makes me complicit, but at least I can tell the truth now." The judge sat back, removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly. When he put them back on, his expression had hardened into something Caleb hadn't expected to see— actual justice. "I've heard enough," Carmichael said. "The petition for annulment is denied. The marriage between Caleb and Eliza Hart is legal and binding. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into Silas Crow's guardianship and his treatment of his stepdaughter. Sheriff Bowman, I want a full report on my desk within a week." "Your Honor, this is outrageous." Harrison tried, but Carmichael cut him off. "What's outrageous is that this went on for years in my jurisdiction, and I was too blind or too bought to see it. That ends today." He looked at Silas. "You're a powerful man, Mr. Crow. You've built an empire, but you built it on the suffering of people who couldn't fight back. Well, one of them just did, and I'll be damned if I help you put her back in chains." The courtroom erupted again, but this time it was celebration. People were hugging, crying, shouting their approval. Tom Hutchins let out a whoop that echoed off the rafters. Martha Miller was sobbing into her husband's shoulder. Silas stood frozen, his empire crumbling around him in real time. Marcus Wade had one hand on his gun, but a dozen men in the gallery had theirs on their own weapons, and even Wade was smart enough to know those odds. Caleb turned to Eliza and found her staring at him with tears streaming down her face. "We won," she whispered. "We actually won." "You won," he corrected. "This was your fight. I just held the door open." She grabbed his hand, held it tight enough to hurt. "Our fight. Our victory." Nora appeared beside them, grinning like a wolf. "That was the most satisfying case I've ever won. Trent's testimony was the key. I wasn't sure he'd break, but the man still has a conscience buried under all that greed." "What happens now?" Caleb asked. "Now? Silas faces investigation, possibly criminal charges. His power in this valley is broken. People saw him lose. That's all it takes sometimes, showing that the emperor has no clothes." They watched as Silas gathered his people and stalked from the courtroom, his back rigid with fury. Marcus Wade followed, shooting looks at Caleb that promised future violence. But for now, they were in retreat. The valley residents surrounded Caleb and Eliza, offering congratulations, apologies for not standing up sooner, promises of support. It was overwhelming, beautiful, exhausting. Finally, they escaped to their wagon. The sun was setting, painting the snow golden and pink. Caleb drove them home through a landscape that looked different now, lighter somehow, less oppressive. "What do we do now?" Eliza asked as the ranch buildings came into view. "We're married. Actually married, not just on paper." "We figure it out," Caleb said. "No rush. We've got time." "Do you want to stay married, or should we—" "Eliza." He pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to face her. "I married you to save you, but somewhere between cutting those chains and watching you face down Silas in court, I realized I'd do it again. Not because you needed saving, because I want to be the person standing beside you." She stared at him, searching his face. "You barely know me." "Then we'll spend the rest of our lives getting acquainted. If you want?" "I want," she said softly, then louder, stronger. "I want." They kissed then, properly this time. Not a seal on a contract, but a promise of something real, something earned through fire and fear and refusing to break. The weeks that followed brought changes that rippled through the valley like stones in water. Sheriff Bowman's investigation uncovered years of corruption, bribery, and abuse. Silas Crow faced criminal charges for unlawful imprisonment and assault. His business empire began to crumble as partners distanced themselves, and loans were called in by banks outside his control. August Trent, perhaps seeking redemption, or perhaps just tired of carrying guilt, testified against Silas in the criminal trial. Others followed, servants who'd seen too much, business associates who'd been threatened into compliance, even Judge Carmichael, who admitted he'd ruled in Silas's favor out of fear and financial pressure. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Silas was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. Marcus Wade disappeared the night before he was supposed to testify and was never seen in the valley again. Caleb and Eliza used that time to build something real from the ashes of their forced marriage. They worked the ranch together, Eliza learning to ride and rope with determination that reminded Caleb of how she'd climbed those cellar stairs. She was stronger than she looked, tougher than anyone gave her credit for. In the spring, when the snow melted and grass turned green, Eliza stood in the yard and looked at the neighboring Crow estate. The county had seized it to pay Silas's debts and fines, and it sat empty, windows dark, a monument to fallen power. "I want to buy it," she said suddenly. Caleb looked at her in surprise. "Why would you want that place?" "Because it doesn't get to be a monument to what he did to me. I want to tear down that house and build something new, something good." Her eyes were bright with purpose. "A school. For the valley children. Somewhere they can learn to read and think and question authority instead of just bowing to it." "That's a lot of work." "I'm not afraid of work anymore. I'm not afraid of much, actually." They bought the estate for a fraction of its value. No one else wanted it, tainted as it was. They spent that summer tearing down the Victorian mansion, salvaging what materials they could, burning the rest. The cellar they filled with concrete, sealing it like a tomb. On that ground, they built a simple schoolhouse with big windows and sturdy walls. Eliza taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history to any child whose parents would send them. She charged no fee, funded it with her share of the ranch profits and donations from Valley residents who remembered how she'd stood up to Silas. Tom Hutchins donated books. Martha Miller provided supplies. Reverend Coleman taught Sunday ethics classes. The school became the Valley's heart, proof that darkness could be replaced with light if you were willing to do the work. 5 years passed. The ranch prospered through hard work and luck. Caleb proved to be a natural rancher, understanding cattle and land in a way that seemed instinctive. Eliza proved to be a natural teacher, patient and firm and inspiring. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, each one carrying Eliza's fierce spirit and Caleb's steady determination. The children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, though the details were softened for young ears. They knew their mother had been locked in darkness and their father had freed her. Knew that sometimes doing the right thing meant standing against power. Knew that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. On their 10th anniversary, Caleb and Eliza stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching their children play in the yard where Silas Crow had once threatened to destroy them. The school stood on the horizon, windows bright with lamplight, as evening classes let out. "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked, leaning against him. "The choice you made that night? Everything that came after?" Caleb thought about it. The fear, the violence, the uncertainty, the sleepless nights and narrow escapes, the moment when everything could have gone wrong. "Not for a second," he said. "You?" "Not one," she smiled. "Though I do wish our meet-cute had been less traumatic." "What, finding your future wife locked in a cellar isn't romantic?" "Strangely, no." They laughed together as the sun set over mountains that had witnessed their struggle and their triumph. The valley stretched out before them, peaceful and prosperous, no longer under one man's thumb. In the town, former victims of Silas's corruption had rebuilt their lives. Tom Hutchins had reclaimed his water rights through the courts. Martha Miller's store had expanded. Sheriff Bowman, stripped of his badge after the investigation, had found work as a ranch hand and a measure of redemption through honest labor. The valley had learned that power unchallenged became tyranny, but power challenged could be broken. That silence in the face of cruelty made you complicit. That standing together, even the weakest could defeat the strong. 20 years after Caleb cut those chains, Eliza stood in front of her school and looked at the faces of children whose parents had been students in her first classes. The school had grown, 2 buildings now, with plans for a 3rd. She'd trained other teachers, spread education through the valley like seeds that had taken root and flourished. Caleb watched from the wagon, gray threading through his hair now, but his hands still strong, his eyes still clear. He'd built something lasting here, not just a ranch, but a legacy. Children who knew their worth, a valley that remembered what happened when good people found their courage. That evening, their oldest daughter asked the question she'd asked 100 times before. "Tell us the story again, about the cellar and the chains." Eliza looked at Caleb, and he nodded. Some stories needed repeating. Some lessons had to be taught again and again until they became bone-deep truth. "It started on a cold October night," Eliza began, "when a cowboy new to the valley heard a sound that didn't belong to wind or coyotes. A sound that was human and hurt and desperate. And instead of ignoring it, instead of deciding it wasn't his problem, he followed that sound across frozen ground to a place where evil thought it was safe." The children leaned in, listening to a story they knew by heart, but never tired of hearing. Because it wasn't just their parents' story, it was the valley's story. A reminder that cruelty could be defeated, that imprisonment could be escaped, that one person's choice to act could change everything. Outside, stars emerged in the darkening sky. The same stars that had watched Caleb cross the property line with his lantern swinging. The same stars that had witnessed Eliza's rescue, their wedding, their victory. The same stars that would watch over generations to come, bearing silent witness to what can be built when people refuse to accept cruelty as inevitable. Caleb and Eliza had started with nothing but desperation and determination. They'd ended with a family, a thriving ranch, a school that educated hundreds, and a valley transformed by their refusal to bow to power. Not bad for a story that began with chains and a scream in the dark. Not bad at all.